Good evening, Rabbi, and
I'm
everybody.
how are you?
You having troubles this evening?
No, it's technology, just no troubles. It's just technology.
Oh, it's probably the rain.
Well, maybe so. Who knows?
We'll give it some credit.
Yeah. How are you?
You having troubles this evening?
Oh no, there it goes. The echo again.
Oh, it's a delay, huh?
Oh no, there it goes. The echo again.
Oh,
How are you? Okay. There it goes. The echo again. All right, maybe that'll stop it. Yeah, that did it. Okay.
Yeah.
Ah, okay. So good enough. We're up and running now, I think, and so we can go ahead and go with one last thing. There we go. Okay. All right, guys. So let's go ahead and begin with the blessing. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu lasoch b'divrei Torah. Bless you, Lord our God, King of the universe, who sanctifies us with his commandments and commands us to engross ourselves in the words of Torah. Okay. Um, so I want to welcome everyone in here tonight to this Hebrews 7. And I wanted to also, I'll say it now and then we'll say it later on, but this coming Sunday is Mother's Day, that I believe. And so we are actually going to be leaving Sunday morning to drive to Navarro Beach, Florida, to meet up with my brother and my sister for a couple of days, and then we will. My sister's bringing over a whole bunch of stuff from my, as many of you know, my mother passed away back in October, and so my sister's collected, the stuff that she had left, what little she had left of um, knickknacks and things like that, and so we're going to meet over there and bring that stuff back home, and so I'll be out next week on the 13th, but then we'll be back on the 20th of May, and so then we'll pick up the study then for 8th chapter of Hebrews on the 20th of May. But at any rate, just so I can get my legal stuff in here right now, this is Steve Sheik. I'm the um, congregation leader and rabbi at Tree of Life Messianic Congregation. And so if any of you are listening to us and you're in the Houston area, you're certainly invited to come visit with us in worship service on Shabbat. So, all right, let's go ahead and get going. Before I get going, then, are there any questions that may have popped up if you've read chapter 7 in preparation for the class tonight? If there's any questions, or if you had something from last week, that would be fine. That'd be a good time to do that. All right. Now, what I want what I wanted to show you here is, okay, these pictures of Abraham meeting Melchizedek. And if you look on the internet, you pull up paintings or pictures of Abraham meeting Melchizedek, you'll see everything from, on the right hand side, Peter Paul Rubens and his portrayal of that. And of course, with Rubens, I don't see normally Rubens has very Rubenesque naked ladies, but he doesn't on that particular scene. But he's got Abraham in some kind of Greco-Roman armor and so forth. So that's kind of funny. And then on the left-hand side, then you have the Mormon version of it. And I can't remember if it's Mormon or J Dubs, their version of Melchizedek blessing Abraham. So it's it's kind of interesting, the difference, and there's everything in between. I mean, there's a ton of them on the internet. Even they had a coloring page that I could have put out there so that you could color it, but anyway, that's the portrayal of it. So let's go ahead and get with the verses then. Verse 1 and 2. For this Melchizedek was king of Salem, Kohen of God Most High. He met Abraham returning from the defeat of the kings and blessed him. And to him Abraham apportioned a tenth of everything. First, by the translation of his name, he is king of righteousness and also king of Salem, which is king of Shalom. All right, so Melchizedek, his name means king of righteousness. He was the king of Salem, which was later Jerusalem, and the priest of the Most High. And the Bible says that name, the Most High God, was El Elyon. And then Melchizedek's sudden appearance and disappearance in the book of Genesis is very mysterious, and there's been a lot of writing on who this guy really was. And Melchizedek and Abraham first met after Abraham's defeat of Chedorlaomer, and his three allies, the kings. I guess there's also like 5 kings, but all of them, they had raided down Sodom and Gomorrah, and they had taken Lot captive, Lot and his family captive. So Abraham gathered up his men, and they went up there and defeated them up north of Damascus someplace. They'd gone up through the city of Dan, and kind of interesting because I'd been up at Dan and actually stood in the doorway of the fortified city of Dan, where Abraham would have actually walked through. That kind of cool. And so anyway, Abraham went up there, defeated the kings, and brought back Lot and his family and a whole bunch of booty. And so he met Melchizedek at Salem, or Jerusalem. Okay, it was later Jerusalem, but at that time it was Salem, which he was the king and he was the priest. And so Melchizedek came and presented bread and wine to Abraham and his men. Now, Abraham had about, if I remember, it's like, I can't remember exactly if it was 318 or 383 men in his little army. And so that was Abraham's army, and he defeated the 5 kings and their armies. So who knows how many there were, but anyway, he defeated them, beat them up pretty badly, and got their goodies for the spoils of war, and he brought it back. And Melchizedek blessed Abraham in the name of El Elyon, God Most High. And then he praised God for giving Abraham a victory in battle. And you'll read all of that in Genesis 14, 18 to 20. Just to cut 3 verses, and that's just about all you see of Melchizedek. So Abraham presented Melchizedek with a tithe, a tenth, of all the items that he had gathered for the spoils of war. Now, this is only the spoils that he took from the 5 kings. All of the possessions and everything of the people who had come out of Sodom and Gomorrah with Lot, he just gave that back to the people because it wasn't his. He just took the spoils from the invading kings. So Abraham presented Melchizedek with a tithe, and so by doing so, Abraham indicated that he recognized Melchizedek as a priest who ranked higher spiritually than he, Abraham. Okay. And in Psalm 110, Melchizedek is presented as a type of the Messiah. That psalm is a messianic psalm. And so this theme of Melchizedek and Yeshua, and Melchizedek being greater than Abraham, Yeshua being greater than Melchizedek, is repeated all through from there on out the book of Hebrews. And both Melchizedek and Yeshua were considered as kings of righteousness and peace. Now, by citing Melchizedek and his unique priesthood as a type, the author here shows that Yeshua's new priesthood is superior to the old Levitical order and the priesthood of Aaron. Okay, the first 10 verses of Hebrews is of Hebrews 7. That's the theme of that, the first 10 verses of Hebrews 7. So now some probably, well, I wasn't even going to mention this, but anyway, some people will propose that Melchizedek was actually a pre-incarnate appearance of Yeshua, or what they would call a Christophany. And so their theory behind that was that later on Abraham received a visit in Genesis 17 and 18, where the three strangers came to visit Abraham, and then they told him about they were going to destroy Sodom and Gomorrah. And so that one of the visitors, of course, was indeed the angel of the Lord, or again, speculation as to whether that was really Yeshua in a pre-incarnate form, or if it was an angel, or what it was. But one of the things that I wanted to point out in this thing was in these two verses was that Abraham recognized Melchizedek as greater than him, and that it said that he was the king of righteousness and the king of Salem. And so if you look at the king of righteousness, and then also the king of Salem, which is the king of Shalom, so that righteousness preceded peace, meaning that he was righteous, and that led to peace. So righteousness leads to peace.
Rabbi, I was looking at, but something really struck me here is the fact that it says that in verse 3 says he's without father, without mother, and without genealogy, having neither beginning of days nor end of life. So immediately that kind of begged the question, well, how did he get his name? And when you look at Genesis 14, which is where you first see him, see his name, the actual name in Hebrews, Melchizedek. That literally means my righteous king. And why that is significant is because if you look at the Messianic Psalm number 2, where it says, why do the nations rage and the peoples mutter vain things? The kings of the earth set themselves together, and the rulers take counsel together against the Lord and against his Messiah. But in just a couple of verses later on, it says, "V'ani nasachti malchi al Zion har kodshi." Says, but I have set my king Malchi on Zion. So and so here you have Melchizedek, my righteous king. He's the king of Shalem, which is the area of Jerusalem. But I just thought that was very interesting that here he is. He says God's calling him God himself has said, I have set my king. It's Malchi, and he's called in Genesis 14 Melchizedek, my righteous king. So I just thought that was very interesting.
Yeah, there's a lot of mystery surrounding Melchizedek, and that of course that allows a great deal of speculation among all of the theologians as to what that really meant. And in fact, let's look at verses 3 and 4. It says, "Without father and without mother, without genealogy, having neither beginning of days nor an end of life, but made like Ben Elohim, he remains a Kohen for all time. Now see how great this man is. Even Abraham the patriarch gave him a tenth out of the plunder." So the author says that Melchizedek was without father and mother, without genealogy, without beginnings of days or an end of life, and he resembled or was created to be like or to look like or to act like, to have the character of the Son of God. He remains a priest forever. Now, so there's a question there. Did the author of Hebrews mean this actually, or was this a figurative description? Now, if the description in Hebrews is literal, then it's difficult to see how it could be properly applied to anyone except Yeshua. No mere earthly king remains a priest forever because they die. You know, all kings die. And no mere human is without father or mother. So if Genesis 14 describes a theophany, then God the Son came to give Abraham his blessing. He appeared as the King of righteousness, the King of peace, the mediator between God and man. But now, if the description of Melchizedek is a figurative description, kind of an allegory or something like that, then the details of having no genealogy, no beginning, no ending, and a ceaseless ministry they're simple statements that accentuate this mysterious aura, this mysterious nature of the person Melchizedek who met Abraham. So in this particular case, the silence or the lack of clarity here in Genesis is purposeful. I think it has a purpose, and it makes actually a better link between Melchizedek and Yeshua. We'll explain that as we go along. So what the author of Hebrews is likely doing here is he's using an argument of silence to suggest that since the Tanakh scriptures say nothing about Melchizedek's genealogy or his death, that his priesthood must somehow carry on and being carried on. Silence in the scriptures was actually a major feature of Alexandrian Jewish exegesis, which sometimes you'd see that in the teachings of Philo, and Philo used an argument that used the argument of silence to deal with the fact that the Tanakh did not speak of the death of Cain. Stay with me here. In one of his writings two of his writings that Philo had, he talked about the scriptures did not address the death of Cain. And we know that Cain surely died a human's death. I mean, he would have, somewhere along the line, he would have died. And so, but Cain's spirit of murder, his spirit of malice for his brother lives on. And we see it today in today's world. And it continues on throughout the ages, and we see it in our communities today. All you have to do is look
Rabbi,
on
can you hear me?
campus. So, Alan, you had a comment?
Miss Tony says she's a little
Or
nervous.
you punched the button wrong?
She
Alan?
doesn't want May to be anxious. She's quite happy to speak to her through me. Are you
Okay.
happy?
I think he wants to punch the button wrong. All right. I think here, in a similar matter, the priesthood of Melchizedek may be regarded as being present and functioning in the salvation activity of Yeshua the Messiah. Even though there's no death, there's no ending of it, so therefore his priesthood, his function of priesthood was carrying on even at the time of the writing of Hebrews, and it's still carrying on today. All right, so and I made some notes here that he was created, Melchizedek was created like or similar to the Son of God, and I'm not real sure about the whole idea that this was a Christophany, a pre-incarnate Yeshua. I think there might have been a guy there that did he die? Of course he would, unless he was a supernatural being. Yes, he died, and the idea that he had no beginning or ending. That just kind of lends to the mystery of it, So any comments or questions on that? I know sometimes this is a little bit hard to take, and we have to revert back to what the author said of his Hebrew audience there in chapter 5 and 6. He says, "Hey, you guys need to wake up and grow up and get some of this stuff." And so I would say back to the author of Hebrews, hey, we're trying. This is just sometimes a difficult concept. Okay. So in Hebrews 5 and 7, it says, "Indeed, these sons of Levi who receive the priesthood have, according to Torah, a command to collect a tithe from the people, that is, from their kin, although they have come out of the loins of Abraham. But this one, who did not have their genealogy, has collected tithes from Abraham and has blessed him, the one holding the promises. Now it is beyond dispute that the lesser is blessed by the greater." All right. So the descendants of Abraham paid tithes, or a tenth, to their priests, the sons of Levi. But Abraham himself then paid tithes to Melchizedek. So the writer was really contrasting Aaron and Melchizedek here more than Abraham and Melchizedek in this section. He implied that the one to whom Abraham paid tithes, which was Melchizedek, was superior to the one to whom Abraham's descendants paid tithes. So he was saying that, Melchizedek is a greater priest than the later on Aaronic or the Levitical priests, the Aaron and all of his descendants. So greater people typically bless lesser people. So the fact that Melchizedek blessed Abraham shows his authority or superiority over Abraham in a second way. So not only that Abraham gave him the tithes, but then Melchizedek blessed Abraham. So I don't know. Did I confuse anybody on that? I mean, I hope not. But did you get it all? Any comments or questions on that?
Well, Rabbi, who are they paying tithes to before Melchizedek then? You mentioned that they paid tithe to
No one, because they didn't have there was not or that's not specified. There was no requirement to pay tithes to anyone before the Mosaic law. Okay, so yeah, they just didn't have a requirement to pay tithes. Now, then once the Mosaic law came into effect, then that's when, the Levites did not have an inheritance like the
Right.
rest of the tribes did, and so their sustenance, their support came from tithes of the people, because the Bible says that the Levites had God for their inheritance. They didn't inherit land.
So are you saying the tithes of the Israelites to the Levites came through the sacrifices? The
No,
animal
not
sacrifice?
not only the sacrifices, but also the tithe on their produce when they would,
Right.
if they
Right.
went and sold, they had land and they sold 1,000 bushels of grain of some sort. Well, then they would be required to bring in 1/10 of that, or 100 bushels of grain, and bring it to Jerusalem, or sell it and then put the money and the equivalent of that money, of that value, and bring it to Jerusalem for the maintenance of the Levites, and also then they would have other taxes that they paid for the maintenance and upkeep of the temple itself.
Oh, okay. All right. Thank you.
Okay. All right. So going ahead with verse 8. In one case, dying men receive tithes, but in the other, one about whom it is testified that he lives on, through Abraham, even Levi, the one receiving tithes has paid the tithes, so to speak, for he was still in his father's loins when Melchizedek met him. Okay, so this is very, in many ways, kind of confusing. All right, and so we'll try to break it down here. The mortal priests, the priests of the Levitical priesthood, were mortal men. They received tithes, but the spiritually immortal priesthood of Melchizedek lives on, because why? It says he was without end, and so that spirit of the Melchizedekian priesthood lives on. Stay with me here. The writer's interpretation, and it's going to kind of stretch your mind a little bit. Okay, he says that it might even be said that Levi, the receiver of tithes, later on, we're talking about 400 years later, that the Levites would be receiving tithes. Well, now he's saying that this Levite, this proto-Levite, would, represented by Abraham, would be paying tithes based on the fact that he was still, he was a descendant of Abraham, even though he was still in the loins, or maybe in the DNA, as it were, of Abraham. This Levite from 400 years later was paying tithes. Why? Because Abraham paid tithes to Melchizedek. So therefore, it's saying that, again, establishes the idea that the order of Melchizedek was a greater, higher priesthood than was the later on Levitical priesthood. So he's saying that Levi was able to give tithes even though he was not yet born, because he existed in the body of his ancestor. I know that's a stretch. That's one of those things that you just have to think about a little bit. So if Levi is able to tithe, and I'll put that in air quotes there, after a fashion through Abraham, and Levi was only existing, as we would say, in a spark in his father's eye, but in the genetic DNA or sperm of his great grandfather Abraham, then it could be said that Melchizedek lives on after a fashion in the priestly ministry of Yeshua the Messiah. I hope that makes sense to you. That because Melchizedek was, it says he was without end. You know, the priesthood of Messiah catches up or picks up that priesthood of Melchizedek, and then it continues it and extends it on out through eternity. So that's what I think the writer of Hebrews is trying to bring out. It's kind of a difficult concept, and I can see where the writer then would be admonishing his listeners to, guys, grow up. I got some tough things that I need to talk to you about, and that's Melchizedek and the continuing priesthood. You got to be a little bit more mature if you're going to grab onto this stuff. So, any comments, questions on that? All right.
I just say you can see how closely the talk about Melchizedek ties in with all the messianic verses in like Psalms 110, and Hebrews 2, and in various places. You can see you the more it's especially as you go farther on in Hebrews, you get to see the picture even more clearly. It's just pretty striking, really.
Oh, it is. It really is. Okay. All right. So, all right. Now, Alan, you'd said in an earlier thing that you'd lost the audio, and then you backed out and came back in. Are you hearing okay now?
Yes. You're
Okay.
5x5 again.
Okay. Well, I don't know what's happening here other than the fact that our weather here is kind of soupy, and it might have some effect on that. I don't know. All right. So good deal. All right, so the author here, let's go ahead with verse 11. Now, if perfection was through the Levitical priesthood, in parentheses, for based on it the people have been given the Torah, what further need was there for a different Kohen to arise, designated according to the order of Melchizedek, not according to the order of Aaron or Aaron? So for whenever the priesthood is altered out of necessity, an alteration of law also takes place. So this is one of those tougher concepts here. Okay, before I go with this, Rich Withers said, Yeshua, our high priest after the order of Melchizedek rather than the Aaronic priesthood, is indicative of a much higher spiritual order for a heavenly race of men born again from above by the Holy Spirit. I think that's correct. That's the whole theme here that the author is trying to say, is that Melchizedek was greater than the Aaronic Levitical system, and also because and then Yeshua then of course was greater. We'll see that later on, is greater than the sacrificial system of the law. The author uses the word perfection, teleiosis, to mean a condition where the people are in right standing with God. If perfection had been attained through the Levitical priesthood, then why would there ever be a need for another priest to come along, like, in the order of Melchizedek, and not the order of Aaron? So if that perfection was there, and the word perfection, it's the way that they use it is not how we use it in our English language today. When we say something is perfect, it can mean that it's without flaw, and that there's no defects or anything like that. But in the day, in the way that it was used in those days, perfect could mean to be completed, something that has reached a logical and desired ending. And so it was perfected. And so it's a little bit different way that the word was used. So the perfection that the author is talking about here is the state of the people being totally and completely reconciled to their creator. So this particular state, this was a state being totally reconciled to the creator, was simply unattainable in the Levitical system because sacrifices had to be continually offered before the Lord for the propitiation of sins. This had to go on and on and on all of the time. And every year you'd have Yom Kippur. And so it was not a perfect system. So this doesn't necessarily make the Levitical system or Levitical priesthood bad or even imperfect, even though I think it was imperfect, because the Levitical priesthood was given by God. It was established by God. So you can't say that it was crummy. It didn't work or whatever. It was established by God, who is perfect, but I think it was established as a measure that had an end point. It was a measure, it was a practice that God had set up that said, okay, this is not going forever and ever and ever, amen. This is going to go until I send the Redeemer, and then that system of sacrifice for the atonement of sin will end. Now, if you think about it, when was the Torah given? The Torah was given somewhere around 1446 BCE. So say 1500 years before Yeshua. Well, now it's been over 2000 years since Yeshua. So that means that the system of the Melchizedekian order, the system of atonement through Yeshua, has now outlasted the old original system. So if when you think of it in that regard, the idea of Yeshua outlasting Melchizedek, or outlasting the Aaronic priesthood, which only really, the Aaronic priesthood only lasted 1500 years, something like that. And then here we are over 2000 years later, after the rabbinic, the Levitical priesthood died. Well, certainly that goes to show how much longer the Melchizedekian or the Messianic priesthood has gone along and has superseded the old one. So let's go ahead. And are there?
So may I say,
Sure.
what came to my mind right then is just that God has given us such a long time to get it right, and we still don't,
Yeah.
but we're trying. Yeah.
But it talks about how that if you go back to the verse 12, there it says, for whenever the priesthood is altered, out of necessity an alteration of law also takes place. Okay, the law was not abrogated. The law did not go away. Okay, the Torah was still there. Yeshua himself said that as long as there's a heaven and earth, the Torah is going to be in place. God's instructions, his standard of holiness has not changed. And so because of the priesthood having to change, because why? There's no more temple. So how could you have these priests doing sacrifices when God said no sacrifices outside where the temple is? Well, there's no temple, no sacrifices. So things had to change. And the law was still the law. And I thought about it today when I was writing all of my notes up, that, it's like the idea of H2O. It can exist as a solid ice. It can exist as a liquid water, and it can exist as a vapor, but it's still dihydrogen oxide, H2O, however you want to say that. It's still the same molecule, as it were. So,
Rabbi, can I just share one thing?
Sure.
Because I agree with you. But it talks about, well, when Yeshua said that I've not come to abolish the Torah or the prophets, I've come to fulfill them. And unfortunately, in the wider Christian community, so often they equate fulfill with termination, ending it, where in the Jewish understanding, that to fulfill the scripture is to give proper drash, to give proper interpretation. So the law stayed exactly the same, but Messiah came and he gave the proper drash, he gave the proper interpretation, and clarified it, made it accessible for us.
Yes, and I think what also happened is that the law was given, it was written down, and then over the centuries, man had they'd built fence around fence to ensure that they did not transgress against the law. Well, it got to be to where it was just untenable. And so Yeshua came back, and in other cases, they built loopholes in the law so that they didn't have to deal with some of the things they didn't want to deal with. And so then Yeshua came along and he gave us back the spirit of the law, what the law should have, what was somebody here that I don't know that we got. I don't know if we got any lawyers in our group here tonight, but when you have laws, or you have a code of federal regulations or something, there's some notes that go along with it. And I can't remember from my law days what that was called, but you'd have notes that explain how that legislation came into effect and how the laws were built. And so Yeshua's coming back in and giving us the how and the why for the laws. And like
codicils, maybe like codicils,
something like
codicils, like legal codicils.
Yeah, something like that. I can't remember the words from. I mean, it's been over 50 years since I sat in a law class. So, I was that was just at the academy. Martha, you had your mic open. Did you have something?
Well, on a more simplistic level, for me to understand what's going on here, it seems like God was weaning us, or weaning the concept of the priest and their position with the people. He was weaning us off of that, meaning to take our eye off the man part of coming to have sacrifices presented to move on to something higher than a human fleshly savior. And so since Melchizedek was there, I mean, there's no proof he had a mother or a father, but they said he was a man. So that almost intimates he had parents, but there's no proof of that, no record of it. It seems like God is weaning off his people from the concept that a man has to have another man help him be atoning for his sins, moving us away from that concept to the concept of somebody higher and more perfect, meaning now it brings the atonement to completion. And the completion is through the death and resurrection of Jesus Christ, i.e., I don't know, through Melchizedek somehow. I don't know. But it seems like that's what it sounds like to me, he was weaning the
Yeah.
people off the concept of human savior and salvation to more of something higher and more complete. Because, like you were saying, the sacrifices came to an end, the temple came to an end, meaning man can't save you, your sacrifices can't save you, but Yeshua can save you, and it's through him. So it seems like there's a weaning off period through this Melchizedek concept.
Yeah.
And
and-
also they can't save you, but they're not changing you either. I mean, you're not changing, you're just doing the same thing over and over and over. Whereas Yeshua, when you go to him in repentance, the Holy Spirit will change you, because through him you get the Holy Spirit.
Well, and that's the case of the difference between the old covenant and the new covenant is where he says, I will write my laws on your heart. So that hopefully when you give your heart to the Lord, there's going to be a change in your behavior, a change in your attitude. And I've said it, many times before, when you come to the Lord, you get saved, your wife's going to know it, your kids are going to know it, your friends are going to know it. Shoot, even your dog's going to know it. And because you got a different way of looking at the world and a different attitude, different way of treating those around you. And so that's what the better priesthood of Yeshua will bring about, is a better person. Okay, so let's go on then. I guess we're at verse 13. I'm going to have to hurry here too. For the one about whom these things are said belongs to another tribe, for which no one has officiated at the altar. For it is clear that our Lord has sprung forth from Judah. Concerning this tribe, Moses said nothing about Kohanim. And it's even more evident if another Kohen arises like Melchizedek, one made not by virtue of a Torah requirement of physical descent, but by virtue of the power of an indestructible life. For it is testified, you are a Kohen forever according to the order of Melchizedek. Okay, what does all that mean? That's 4 verses there that could very well have been brought down to about 1. But from here, verse 13 on through the end of chapter 7, the author of Hebrews describes the superiority of the priesthood of Yeshua when compared to the Levitical the Levitical priesthood. And so he reflects on the reality that Yeshua was not from the line of Levi, but he was from the tribe of Judah. And so this is another confirmation that the priesthood had transitioned from Levi to Melchizedek. Okay, the author quotes again. He quotes this messianic psalm of 110, verse 4. So that he says, you are a priest forever according to the order of Melchizedek. Yeshua is the Melchizedekian priest forever. So unlike the Levitical priest who would they would have to retire and they would eventually die, Yeshua the Messiah will serve in the role of a Melchizedekian priest in perpetuity. Okay, I gotta okay. Okay, and thanks Ed for the kudos. This is a tree of life has made it a better person to be, and I'm grateful. Thank you for that. Rich Withers said, "You have heard that it is said to those of old, but I say to you." Okay, we can only. That's one of the things that Yeshua would say. Well, you've heard it said, but then I'll tell you what it is, and so. Says we can only, Rich goes on and says, we can only live a holy life before the Lord by being Christ-centered and allowing him to live his own righteous life within us and expressing himself through our heart and life freely surrendered to him. Absolutely. And one of the things that Yeshua used to say when he was teaching the people, he said, well, you've heard it said of old, or you've heard it said before that, A, B, C, whatever. He says, but I'm telling you that what that really means is, for instance, the idea of adultery, you obviously we don't commit adultery, but then he says, you look on a woman with lust in your heart, you think about her and you just obsess over her and so forth, you've committed adultery in your heart. And so, and then, if you say ill of your brother, you say, what was it, raka, or fool. So you've committed murder against your brother because you've destroyed part of his character. And so that's why Yeshua is bringing the law to a much higher level of obedience, a much, just a much higher level of trying to think of the right word, but the requirement of the law was going to be much higher, not just down here someplace, but no, you really need to spiritualize it in many ways to make it more a more pure lifestyle, as it were, that you're living a cleaner life by taking control of all your hearts, your thoughts of your mind and your heart and so forth, rather than just going through a list of liturgy or a list of commandments that you do, like, okay, you have to wash your hands before you eat your dinner, okay, or you have to these various things. If you
You have to go to church and sit in that pew, or
yeah,
go to service. You have to just do all these, check your list. Okay, I did it, while you're all
mhm,
in your mind killing people or committing adultery still. And
yeah, yeah.
you
You're
didn't
living on
check.
a higher plane. He wanted to
Yeah.
bring us up to a higher plane. That's okay. All right. So let's go on really quickly. For on the one hand, a formal requirement is set aside because of its weakness and ineffectiveness, for Torah made nothing perfect, but in the other hand, a better hope is introduced through which we draw near to God. Okay, now this verse, these verses here summarize the argument that God has superseded the old Levitical priesthood and the Mosaic covenant. In a way, superseding, yes, he did not do away with it. It evolved into something else because the temple was gone, sacrifices were gone. That part of the law was gone, but the moral requirements of the law still exist, and they are still very important for us today. We still don't covet this and lie and cheat and steal and those kinds of things, and so that part of the law still is in existence and still to be followed, but he's replaced that old system and that some of the commandments with a better, newer system that he couldn't do. That and what it does is that this newer system, through belief in Yeshua and the sacrifice that he made on the cross, it brings us into a more intimate relationship with God. So, and like in verse 19 says, so we can come near to God. So, the word that that he uses here is athetesis, and it means annulment. It's stronger than the word before, which was used in verse 12, which was metathesis, which meant an alteration. So some of these things were just absolutely done away with. So we have a better hope. It's an assurance of a special, eternal, and an intimate relationship with God That's now possible for us to experience that. Why? Thanks to the great high priest, our great high priest. All right. So verse 20 and 20 through 22. Moreover, if it was not without a sworn oath, others indeed have become Kohanim without a sworn oath, but he with an oath sworn by the one who said to him, Adonai has sworn and will not change his mind. You are a Kohen forever. How much more then has Yeshua become the guarantee of a better covenant? So what we're talking about here, the God swore an oath in to Abraham and in Psalms 110 about Messiah's priesthood. The Levitical priesthood had no such origin. It was just okay, this is what you're going to do, and you will have the priest, and it's going to be Aaron, and God didn't say, well, I swear by my own name that Aaron and his descendants are going to be the priests. He just says, no, Aaron and his descendants will be the priests. So what the writer here is saying is because that God had initiated the idea of the messianic propitiation for sin and the atonement for sin with an oath. He said, this is I will be, he made an oath to do that. That made it superior to the priesthood of Levi and Aaron, that it was just a statement that this is what you shall do. But with God promised an oath to install the Messiah permanently as our high priest, and so that's why he could say Yeshua is the guarantee of a better covenant. So since
I just wanted to share something about that, because David Stern makes a commentary on this verse and says, Yeshua by himself has an everlasting priesthood by the power of an indestructible life, as suggested midrashically by the life of Melchizedek. This sets aside the need for a system of passing on the priesthood from generation to generation, as it explicitly states in verses 23 and 25. Also, the word there for permanently, it's like a parabaton, which says permanent, but also means like it's intransmissible. So it can't be transmitted. I mean, I know that like aberrant groups like the Mormons, they try to claim they have the Melchizedek priesthood, but they can't, because it says right here that priesthood belongs to Yeshua and it's intransmissible.
Yeah, exactly right. Exactly right. So that's why what he's trying to say here is that because of the oath, Yeshua is a better priest, and that the priesthood of Yeshua, which Melchizedekian in character because it's everlasting, is much better than the old system. All right, so going ahead, 23 to 25. Now, on the one hand, many have become Kohanim, who through death are prevented from continuing in office. But on the other hand, the one who does remain forever has a permanent priesthood. Therefore, he is also able to save completely those who draw near to God through him, always living to make intercession for them. So the Levitical priests, they had to succeed one another, just because what? They were dying. They kept dying off. These priests would live a life and they would die. Yeshua needs no successor because he will live forever. And so therefore his priesthood is going to continue on forever because he will not die. And just as an aside, Josephus wrote that there were 83 different high priests between Aaron and the destruction of the temple in 70 AD. I don't know if that's important, but you could probably win a Trivial Pursuit if that question ever came up. So it's the idea that Yeshua will not die and need replacement by another priest. That means that he can see his work of delivering his people through all the way to the end, and he can deliver or save completely rather and better, because it's forever. And I'm not saying that that's eternal security. I'm just saying that as you don't have to keep going to Yom Kippur and slaughtering another animal every year, because Yeshua had already made the sacrifice for us. And his sacrifice and the faith in Yeshua draws us closer to the Father, something that the Torah was just not all that good at, and it wasn't personalized like the covenant with Yeshua would be. All right, so we need to get last couple of verses here. I'm way over. For such a Kohen Gadol was fitting for us, holy, guiltless, undefiled, separated from sinners, and exalted above the heavens. He has no need to offer up sacrifices day by day, like those other Kohanim Gedolim, first for their own sins and then for the sins of the people. For when he offered up himself, he did this once for all. For the Torah appoints as Kohanim Gedolim men who have weakness, but the word of the oath which came after the Torah appoints a son made perfect forever. Okay, again, because in view of this superior ministry, it's only fitting that our high priest would be a superior person. And so the author here, the writer of Hebrews, describes as holy, which hosios, and he stresses the blamelessness, and that's another Greek word that's sometimes translated holy, hagios, but it stresses the separation or the separateness of Yeshua. Now, innocent, means without guile or malice and sinless. Undefiled looks to his absolute purity. Now, there's where Yeshua was sinless, and so separated from sinners there, where that probably refers to his being in a different class from sinful people. And certainly Yeshua was definitely in a different class of all people. I mean, he was 100% man, but he was also 100% God. So he was in a completely different plane than what we were. So Yeshua is not only inherently pure, but he remains pure in all of his contacts with sinners. Yeshua was able to reach out and touch the leper and not contract leprosy himself. And so another view of Yeshua's separation from sinners also refers to his elevation or his exaltation and into going up into the heaven and sitting on the right hand of the Father. So in the Israel's daily sacrifices, the priest had to offer sacrifice for his own sins before he could offer one for the sins of others. That was the Tamid offering every morning, every evening. And also on the Day of Atonement, then the high priest would offer a sin of a bull sin offering, the blood of a bull, offering for himself, and then another one for the sins of the people, before he could ever get on with the rest of the Yom Kippur observation. So the priest had to daily atone for his own sins. Yeshua does not need to make up offer up periodic sacrifices to atone for sins, because either his own or the sins of other people. Because why? He was perfect. he did not sin. He did not need the atonement, but his sacrifice once for all was both that did it all for everyone. So he doesn't have to do it again. So the difference between the two priesthoods here is detailed. I mean, let's look back at okay, well, there it is. The Torah appoints men, the Kohanim, the high priest from men, and all the men had weaknesses. They were all sinners. Okay, and then but the one who was brought in as the Kohanim or Kohen Hagadol, the high priest forever on the order of Melchizedek, he was sworn in with an oath. Okay, and so therefore his person, he was a perfect sacrifice, and he will live forever, and so just his amount of superiority just really knows no bounds. And so I think that pretty well does it for this class tonight. Are there any comments or questions? I'm going to go ahead and shut down the